Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. How many of you have sat on the other end of this interview when you start to hear this story and it seems to resonate with each and every one of us? There you are, a young child. You're invited into your teacher's classroom along with your parents. You realize that you're probably not doing as well as you think you should. After all, as children, what we want to do especially is to please our parents with our academic acumen, as well as to make the teacher happy and hope that we get a good report to hopefully avoid punishment. And how often have each and every one of us have probably heard this? Your child is very intelligent, very gifted, but just doesn't seem to be living up to their potential. Boy, that for a lot of people certainly has caused a road of reckoning to keep us from being able to figure out what that exactly is. But what if we could, of each of us, had the opportunity to have a Willard Garvey in our life to show us that your potential is whatever you decide it is? After all, he was a truly living example of just that very thing. But now you're probably scratching your head wondering, well, who's Willard Garvey? Well, that's what we're going to explore today as we talk about the book Willard Garvey, An Epic Life. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is the writer who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning business writer and editor with over 30 years of experience. She's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today to talk about her wonderful biography, Willard Garvey, An Epic Life. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Megan McEnany. Megan, how are you today?
Hi, Daniel. It's Maura, by the way.
Maura, Maura, I had a friend named Maura. That's why. Sorry about that.
No
well,
problem.
At least we got the Willard right?
That's
now,
right.
I'm kind of curious, what happened that this particular story idea floated across your desk?
Well, that's a great question. I was a business reporter, as you know, and many years ago, my very first job in newspapers was at a tiny newspaper called the Humboldt Sun in a place called Winnemucca, Nevada, which is about 3 hours east of Reno. I think there were 2 stoplights there, and I was a 21-year-old from the East Coast, and I had never been to a place like Winnemucca, Nevada before. And in that town, there was a family called the Garvey family, and I heard an awful lot about the Garvey family and the Garvey ranches. They were, at the time, it was the largest private landowners in the state. Mm-hmm. But as it turned out, I ran across a young Julie Garvey who became a dear friend of mine, and over the years we stayed in touch. And after her father, Willard, had passed, there was an opportunity to write his biography. And, of course, I jumped at it because I had heard very much about Willard, and I knew the things that he had done in his life and the impressions that he put on the city of Wichita and around the world. So that's how it came to across my desk.
Now, you take a look and you read a story like this, and most of us growing up, we hear about the captains of industry and names that have become sometimes almost sickeningly too familiar. Thomas Edison, we hear about this guy and what he has been able to do, and we hear about the Vanderbilts, or, the list goes on, and apparently what you have to have is this prominence that's so almost too larger than life as they display these type of people, at us as school children to say, this is what you should aspire to, but it seems to be in a galaxy far, far away. Willard's story really comes right to the back porch and says, it could be that big, and this is how you get started.
No, that's really true. I mean, the joy of writing this book was really, here's a man from the middle of the country, the absolute middle of the country, and he was successful, and he had high aspirations. I called it looking beyond the grain of where he lived to try to not only bring more wealth and more ideas to his own city, but to areas around the world. And you're right. It's important. I think it's important to write about people that aren't those big names too. There are successful business men and women around our country and in our little towns and cities that have made a big impression on those places. It's important to capture that, I think.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing a show a couple of years back, and there was a book I somehow found it in my garage. Apparently, it was sent by a publicity company, and sometimes you'll do a show on them, and sometimes I'm sure you know how this is when it comes to writing stories. And it was funny because I picked this up, and it was about getting the brain to be activated on a full spectrum. Sort of become that Willard Garvey, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But it was interesting to read through this book because when you tend to read about the inspiring things that we should be motivated by, let's say it could be a Jack Canfield book. It's always about those bigger-than-life people that throw it out there where people go, well, that's great, it was inspiring for a moment, but that's way beyond me. But in this book, it talked about people that you probably would have never even heard of anyway. And you thought to yourself, as I just mentioned earlier, it's right there next to you. It's on the back porch, and you think, maybe it's possible for me to at least take that first step and then follow it by a second and then begin to walk faster and then begin to run. And that's a lot of how Willard Garvey was.
I think you're right, Daniel. I think, he was an entrepreneur. He was a man of great ideas, and he did come from money. I mean, he wasn't. He was fortunate that way that he came from money, but it wasn't the kind of thing that he flaunted. He really was about ideas and about making the world a better place, and that individuals could make a difference. He wanted to create wealth. He wanted to create buildings. He wanted to, create homes, help cities do better public projects. This was a man that was engaged wherever he was, and I think you're right when you're talking about young people. It's about being engaged and being willing to participate in the community and places that you go and live.
Now, you talk about the ideas, and I was just reading in the book about one right-hand man, Mr. Page. He said, William Garvey would come at me at least every day with 30 to 32 to 35 ideas. It was my job to eliminate at least 29 or 30 of them. Tell us about that.
Well, was a perfect example of who Willard was. I mean, he was a guy, a very unassuming guy in many ways, but he was running 1,000 miles an hour. And I have met him several times, and he would just quiz you about anything, anybody. It was always about taking something to the next level. More than one person said that to me. Another colleague said to me, he was always trying to do, what are we going to do next? What's new? What do we, and that's the definition of a true entrepreneur, I think, in many ways. How can they create and improve what's out there?
Mm-hmm. Now, taking it back, it was just mentioned earlier, you said that he came from money, but Ray, his father, and Olive, they didn't start with money. Tell us about their story.
That's correct. Well, Ray Garvey started out in a farming town of Colby, Kansas, and he went to college and met his wife, Olive, and they were students. I mean, they didn't really have a lot. Ray Garvey had a newspaper route that he helped pay for some college. And he went out to Colby, Kansas, and wanted to become a lawyer, married Olive, went out there, and then started working with a judge out in Colby, and they started buying property. Well, one thing led to another, and he realized he could make more money in property than he could as a lawyer. Mm-hmm. So he bought some farms and started really building an empire that way. A lot of people might call him one of the first early corporate farmers. And he took his family and he moved to Wichita in 1928. Willard was then 8 years old at the time. His wife wanted his family to have a little bit more of a better education in a bigger city. And Ray would go back and forth to Colby all the time, and this is in the 30s and 40s. And he built his empire that way, spread out into doing things like gas stations and oil businesses. Ray's motto was, "If there's a need, we'll fill it." Mm-hmm. And so that Willard grew up at the knee of his entrepreneurial father, and then kind of took it even further. But in my studies and reading, Ray Garvey was also a very fascinating character, and he's in the Kansas Business Hall of Fame as well. So there's a lot about Ray Garvey that was quite significant. But Willard was his oldest son, and really, I think as you started out the program with, he wanted to please his father. Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of ways he that was a motivator for him, was to do well by his father.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. The listeners should note, too, as Ray Garvey began his enterprise, this was during the time in what is known as the Dust Bowl, when they had the raging, ravaging dust storms that really destroyed a lot of families and a lot of opportunity for a lot of people. But they somehow not only managed to make their way through this, but they were also considered to be even environmentalists during their time. Well,
that's right, because Ray Garvey and his partner figured out a way to not overplant the fields, but to give them a rest in between and to do winter wheat harvesting. And so there are some that say, of course, that it was the farmers who really created the Dust Bowl, but there are others that say, if Ray Garvey was smart about how he did things, and yes, he built an empire that way, but he also learned how to rest different fields and give them and plant winter wheat during the off season.
Plus, not only that, but in this case, he also didn't put his eggs all in one basket. As you said, he created gas stations which were close to farms. So he was kind of spreading around things. So if one area wasn't doing so well, another area would kind of come in and soothe what wasn't happening on the other side. That's
correct. And then Ray Garvey, during the post-World War II years, and even when the soldiers were over, when we were fighting the war, he was back in Wichita and decided to build homes. And so he got into the building business in Wichita and started building what we know as, post-World War II housing, which Willard eventually took over and built into a bigger empire. But yes, Ray Garvey was a genius in many ways on that front, and I think obviously his son learned from him.
And what's really exciting to let people know about, too, is that, Ray and Olive had a very endearing, close relationship, and she was very much involved in the business aspect. It was, as they said later, family and business were the same thing.
That's very, very, very true, and tragically, Olive had to go beyond that because Ray died when he was in 1959, when he was, I believe, 63. And Olive went on to take this fortune and run the company. And she was in Wichita. There was Olive Ann Beach, who of the Beach Aviation fame. Olive Beach and Olive Garvey were both running these incredible franchises at the time. So yes, she was, again, after Ray passed on, Olive definitely took up the branch and was admired in Wichita until her death when she was 90.
That was cute the way you said Olive took up the branch.
I know. I know. It was kind of hokey. I apologize.
But I think it's great. And the thing is that I think listeners should really be aware of is long before women were trying to assert their rights, Olive was way beyond that. It wasn't even necessary. It was just about individualism and being able to do what you're able to do.
That's correct. And Olive was also a writer herself in her later years. And Willard had 6 children, and there were 4 girls in the family as well. And one of the daughters told me they would sit around the table and talk business, and there was never anything about women and men. I mean, he would talk to you about business if you were 9 years old, and expect you to believe it. So business really was the family legacy, and it didn't matter who you were, what sex you were, whatever. It was all about business.
Now, Willard, of course, he went into the military. He was very active in World War II, and it was through that experience that he began to implement the organization style of the military because he found it to be very highly efficient. So this is kind of how he began to shape and be able to take his ideas and put them into a pattern to take one step to the next step to the next step. And I think when you look at this day and age, there are millions of people, billions perhaps, they have ideas, but so many of them never get started. I think it's just because they just really either A, can't trust that they can take that first step, or they really don't know how. Tell us about how Willard Garvey went about it.
Well, he always said that life was a project, and you're right, Daniel. I appreciate your careful reading of this book. He did learn from the military. I think in some time he was a big anti-government fellow, but loved the fact that the government and the Army, where he got his biggest lessons, was very systematized, and he was systematized in the way that he approached anything. One of his famous quotes is, "Life is a project." And he thought, if you had an idea, let's make it a project. Let's put it down on paper and try to figure out what steps we have to do to get it done. He created the system, he called it the GO system, which could stand for Garvey Organization, Go Anywhere. It was, people who worked for him told me that it was a series of things you had to put on paper, how we were going to get it done, what was it going to cost, and what the outcome was. It was frustrating for some, but at the same time, as you said, it sort of was able to help people put their ideas down. I think Willard had so many ideas. This was a way for him to organize his mind, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, another way to keep his mind busy, too, is that he really had a penchant for swimming.
That's correct. Yes, he was a swimmer from the time he was, 8 or 9 years old, and he swam in college at the University of Michigan under Matt Mann's championship team. When he went to the war, he swam for the Army team, and there were articles of him in the Stars and Stripes winning awards. And I think swimming, like his systematic approach, kind of helped him clear his head, I think. But he swam every day, almost until the day he died. He started the Wichita Swim Club. He would, in overseas in England, he would be swimming in ponds. I had people telling me we were out at a meeting, and I looked out on the water, and there was Willard swimming across the pond. One of his associates told me that at 3 o'clock every day he was out the door. He was going to go swimming. He'd come back with his toupee in a briefcase and a wet bathing suit and leave people waiting to go swimming. It was very, very important to him, and that was very admirable. And he's also in the International Hall of Fame, the Swimmers Hall of Fame down in Florida. So there's a lot about him. Swimming was a very big part of his life.
I wonder if he ever influenced Michael Phelps in any way.
I don't know.
Or what it would have been like if those two had swam next to each other. I was thinking about that as I was reading, because he was just a determined competitor.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, all the children swam, I know, and it was a neat part of their lives.
Mm-hmm. I think what's important too, going back to his time in service during World War II, is that even though he seemed to be on the fringe, he was really right in the middle of the war, and this worldly view really shaped a lot of how he began to not only see opportunities everywhere, but following through on these things as well.
No, that's true, Daniel. I loved writing about World War II because
I could see that.
Oh. Was it too long?
No, it was just wonderful because you brought more. It wasn't so, when you tend to hear about World War II or read about it or see it on television through documentaries, sometimes you're in awe, but sometimes it's so dry and methodical, but you really added an animation. And I say this because I remember as I was reading the biography of Larry Hagman, it was much the same way because he served time in the military as well, but he was more on the entertaining side of things. And so there was a real animation behind it. We'll get to something very unique about Willard Garvey here in a minute, but tell us about, you were writing about World War II and how you came to bring all this together to give people more of a perspective of how he had a worldview that really shaped a lot of how he made a lot of his decisions. Well,
the thing that was very interesting that allowed that chapter to really come to play was that we were over at the Garvey family one day and literally came upon a trunk of old letters. And what happened and what we had were boxes and boxes of letters that went back and forth from the Garveys to Willard back and forth, talking about this young man and his experiences in the war. And so, but of course you couldn't really say what exactly was going on. So it was what I did was sort of lay out all the letters and try to trace this man's experience through this war. Mm-hmm. And it was so interesting, and it was so much fun. In a lot of, it took me forever, but to get the details and to really understand, and that's how you write a biography. Essentially, is to walk someone through history, and all this history was happening around him. He was not a soldier in the trenches. His fingernails didn't get very dirty in the war. He ended up being an officer, working in a hotel, a converted hotel in England. And because he was from the Midwest and owned property, and they thought he was a gentrified man, and he was landed gentry because he had like 50,000 acres or something. I don't remember the exact number, but he started hobnobbing with a lot of high-level society people and some royalty at the same time. So, but he knew that he had to keep studying for his next level of in the Army to become an officer, a higher officer each time. And he ended up going to Potsdam after the war, which is where the Allied leaders ended up carving up Germany and deciding the future of Poland and enlisting Russia to defeat Japan. But his experience, again, as we talked about, he saw Stalin walk by him. He was like, as I like to say, this Forrest Gump character who was in these amazing places when history was unfolding all around him. And when he got back from the war, it just made such an impression on him that he always talked about it. And I have a lot of his speeches where he talked about his experience in the war. So that's kind of how that whole chapter came to be.
Well, what was very unique about that chapter is just what you talked about, the Potsdam situation. Yeah. There he steps out the door, and 50 feet away from him is Joseph Stalin. Tell us more about that.
Well, again, this was a letter that this was in many of his speeches, that Willard was an officer, and he was helping to set up the Potsdam Conference. And, it was a very elaborate thing. He was basically pulled out of a burning Berlin and taken into the country, to Potsdam, to set up, this conference. And again, he's there, and he talked about it many times, that Stalin walked by him, 50 yards from him or whatever, and he said, if I had shot him, I would have changed the history of the world or something. Well, of course he wasn't going to do that. He was a major at the time. But interesting, you just never know, like, these moments. And I do want to say one thing. Like, when I met Willard and when I heard about some of these stories and the things that he accomplished and some of the great people he met, I wasn't sure he was telling the truth. And so part of my challenge in writing this book was to really try to dig to see, did this really happen? Was Stalin really at Potsdam, or, whatever?
Right.
And time again, everything that he claimed panned out. So that was kind of fun as well in doing the book.
Well, I think what was funny about that particular incident was when he realized, there I seen Stalin within 50 feet of myself, and there I have my .45 caliber sidearm, and I realized I could have shot this man, but that would have been my last shot. So I came to realize in my thinking that opportunities sometimes have various something or other. Now I can't remember. What was the quote, that specific quote?
Oh, I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, anyway, it has sometimes opportunity has various choices or something like that. So that was probably one of those moments that shaped.
Oh, no, here it is.
Okay.
As Willard sometimes said, the incident was a vivid reminder that opportunities with alternative options.
Right,
occur.
Exactly. And that's why I found that really funny that, here you have this opportunity, like you said, he could have changed the world, but he realized, well, maybe this just isn't one of those world-changing things I need to be involved with.
That's right.
Now, one of the things we do know that really significantly changed his life was, of course, meeting Gene. Oh, now, as his brother had said, and you were writing in the book, he had a very serious list of criteria when it came to settling down after the war. That's
right. One of the great letters that I found, I think Willard's brother was going to marry someone, and Willard wrote him a long letter, said, before you marry someone, these are the things you should look for, does she, basically it was almost like a horse list, does she have good teeth, is she willing to do that? But it's true, Willard came back from the war, and he was set up on a blind date with the most beautiful woman, I think, in Kansas, Jean Kendall Garvey, and every photo I saw of her, she was gorgeous, big eyes, beautiful, and she was alive when I was writing the book, and she told me how she was set up on this blind date, and up came this gorgeous man in his uniform, and they went out, and they danced, and he was the best dancer she'd ever had, and they were married, within months. But really, Jean ended up being sort of the soft side of Willard's rough edges. They, again, like Olive Garvey, she became the matriarch that attended all business meetings with him. They traveled all around the world in the Young Presidents Organization and met a lot of people like Sir John Templeton, very wealthy, as we talked about earlier, the sort of independent businessmen in this world that you may not hear as much about. But she was, obviously she raised their 6 children together, and they were just a beautiful couple around Wichita. But Willard had that rough edge, and some people told me that, gosh, when they saw him coming, they didn't really want to talk, because he was quite he had quite a platform, anti-government platform, and a libertarian platform, if you will, that he stuck on to a couple of ideas. But Jean softened a lot of that. They would see her, and they would feel relief, because she would be able to calm him down a little bit. And in him, he was a worldly, beautiful, athletic man who idolized his parents and valued his siblings, and they had a beautiful partnership for over 50 years. It was really very sweet.
I'd like to touch on that for a bit about, for instance, Willard's stance on government, because I know that he adopted a lot of that from his father, who felt very much the same way. And, especially when you look at today, the way a lot of Americans are feeling about what our government has been doing, it's almost as though back then they were pretty prophetic about this. And one other unique thing, too, is over the years as I've been doing this show, is that I was, raised to see, for instance, Franklin Delano Roosevelt as this great man, but it seems more and more these skeletons come creeping out of the closet, and you realize, well, maybe this guy wasn't what we thought he was. They really didn't like FDR very much.
No, that's very true, and I mean, that was sort of something that I learned from writing the book. I came from the East Coast, and there are a whole lot of other people in this country who think a lot differently, and you have to respect other people's ideas. But there's, I think, the middle of that country, had a completely different idea about what was going on in the country at the time, and that was kind of neat to get that perspective on a lot of it. And yes, I mean, I kind of call it the Kansas Prairie independent, pioneering spirit, if you will. You do it on your own. You don't need any help. And that's really what a lot of the core values are for a lot of folks out there. And Willard clearly, when Ray Garvey was in the farming business and the Depression was on and FDR was setting limits on what people could plant, they essentially felt that he was taking something away from them, and they really resented that. And then when they were making millions, there was a lot of taxes that threatened at one point when Ray Garvey died to almost dissolve the entire business. So there was clearly that, and that was huge influence in Willard's life, and he was going to always let you know that the private solution was always a better idea than government assistance.
But one thing that kind of, I don't know, it was sort of a little bit of an itch, was the privatization of the prison system, and I thought, I don't know if that would really have flown too well, especially this day and age.
Well, I think he would, if he were alive today, he would still call for it. But there is a chapter in the book about a prison that's being built in Wichita, and Willard thought that it was way more expensive than it needed to be, and he didn't necessarily say that it had to be private, although he was in favor of that. What he said was, I have a better way, this is costing way too much, and I can come up with a better way to build it. And that was a lot of his, that's kind of the walk away from the book in a lot of ways. Like today, I think people just say, government is too expensive or whatever. But this is a man who actually, a millionaire, who took the time to come up with his own plans and figure out a better way to do something, instead of just complaining. He said, here's a better solution, why don't we try this? Now, people didn't think it was a good solution in some cases, but in other cases, he came up with a plan and took it to the voters, and they passed it. I mean, he was a participant in his community, and that's, again, kind of the lesson of the book as well.
I kind of see sometimes, even though they may contrast differently, a likeness between Willard Garvey and the way he was raised and Ralph Nader. These were action people. It was all about getting out there. If you see something that needs to be solved, you get out there and you do something about it, or, you raise awareness enough that something can be done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Willard would probably turn over if he heard his name mentioned with Ralph Nader.
Okay.
But on the other hand, it's a democracy we have in America, and I think that he was a great he was that greatest generation American, that did believe in this country a great deal, and so he believed in taking his own right to speak out and to come up with his own version of something. And he never took anything personally. He never did. He just felt that he needed to say something. So there was some yes, we should all speak up for what we believe in, and I think he would respect Ralph Nader for that at least, but perhaps not.
Maybe some of the other things, understood.
Perhaps not, yeah.
It's interesting, too, to note that he had also taken the military style of discipline, if you will, And that was what he applied to his family. And it was interesting because I remember growing up somewhat military, and I remember hearing a report, and I just kind of cringed a little bit like, wow, I remember something like that. Tell us about how he was with his children.
Well, it was the children really who talk about it very openly, that he would, there was a 2-story home that they lived in, and the main living space and the children were downstairs in almost a dormitory kind of a setup called the boys' side and the girls' side. And when Willard wanted to get his children, he would scream, "Report," and then they would have to come scampering up and line up according to number. And I think some of it might have been a little playful for them at the time too, but clearly they all remembered that they each had a number. And it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Based on their ages, exactly.
Yes, yes.
And I found that funny too, because at the same time that he seemed to be, what seemed to be very disciplined, I guess, if you will, he was tremendously compassionate. And I like how you were talking about when the boys would come to the house because they were wanting to court his daughters, his whole approach to the whole thing.
Yes, he was. He did have that real sensitive side to it. I mean, he was a barker clearly, and a yeller that didn't, some people didn't like, and it was difficult. He wasn't easy to live with. But there was a time when the girls were coming of age, and one of the daughters had stayed out late, and Willard just kind of very gently sat her down and said, told her that this is, people essentially, in so many words, wouldn't have respect for somebody like that. And it was very gentle and very loving, and his other daughter remembered that story. It was not, not demeaning in any way, but just very kind and just to try to give her a little bit of a lesson of reality of what the world was like. So and he helped them with visualization. If they were fearful, he would try to tell them to meditate and think about what could be. And I think that was a big part of it. He was definitely a person who envisioned things for himself that occurred, and he would try to teach his children that. Like one of the daughters said she was afraid of skiing, and he sat her down very quietly and said, think of how good it'll be and the positive and how beautiful it is. And she wasn't afraid of it after that. So there was a very gentle side to him as well.
And that's where, as you read this story, you begin to think to yourself today that it's so rare that you see families like this. They're tight-knit, they love each other, they take care of and look after each other, and they're included in everything. It isn't just mom and dad go off to work if, in fact, mom and dad are even still together. And, of course, even in the Garvey household, there was a share of divorces, which I know really touched and sometimes even hurt Willard in some ways, but he also believed in individual choice very strongly.
That's very true, and that he wrote to one of his daughters about that. He was saddened that they had split up, but that he believed that each had to go on and live their life. And again, that's the loving side of it, the independent personal achievements and your independent spirit really was, he lived by that. Mm-hmm. And again, in including everyone, the children were taught about business, but also the world. We haven't talked about his sort of worldly business experience, but he did in the 60s, took his 6 children and mother-in-law around the world for like 4 weeks or 6 weeks. I can't remember. It was probably closer to 6. They went to many, many countries. And it's just imagine hauling a group of kids all around with no cell phones, nothing, and taking them to these places, which to this day, had a great impression on them in their lives.
Mm-hmm. And it would have been hard on Jean because she would have had to have tried to make these children presentable every single day during these trips. Thank God for the hotel laundry, right?
That's right. And what does she call it? Drip dry. They did a lot of drip drying as they went. But they met, leaders from India. Willard was working on a housing program overseas there and setting up affordable housing programs in countries abroad. And they met quite a few leaders, and they were on their best behavior. They had to be on their best behavior.
Now, one thing that people should take away from this story that I think is really marvelous about Willard Garvey is here he's building, it started, of course, with his father, Ray, but then he just continues to compound and build on tremendous wealth for the family, but it also was a result of helping lives of many, 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 many others improve as well. And when you look back, for instance, at the robber barons, you don't feel that's the same kind of a story. It seems, and this is just an opinion, that there's a selfishness. It's all about us building our family dynasty no matter how it impacts other people. But this was way far from that.
Yeah, profit, I don't believe that profit was his driver. I mean, he believed in profits, and he believed in individual wealth, but for him it was about putting people to work, allowing people to have their own homes. There's a long chapter in the book about a project that he had, which he called his best idea, called World Homes. And that was in the days of in the communist scare of the 1950s and 60s. There were many countries that were sort of on the fence, and the United States was figuring out a way to try to bring them over to the capitalistic thought process. And Willard started a program where he would build homes. It was a kind of a complicated financing program, but it would allow him to build low-income, almost like World War II type houses for people. And if he made them a homeowner, they would become capitalists, and that would help thwart communism. It was a brilliant idea. It didn't make money, but he was determined to do it and did it successfully in many countries, including one in Peru, where there's a plaque to his with his name on it because he helped to bring housing to people that couldn't afford mortgages or couldn't have homes. So it was a brilliant project at the time.
I know that when he was getting that project started too, is that they were actually over where he was bringing pamphlets to begin to share the idea, and he was detained.
That's right.
They didn't like that very much.
In one of his many trips, he took his son Jim to Germany, to the Berlin Wall, and he went across the border. It was probably not the Berlin Wall, but he went across the border to East Germany, and he had pamphlets for World Homes about, give a man a home and make him a capitalist. And he was detained a bit while his son John was in a bus, and it was a little scary time for John, but Willard talked his way out of it.
Now, one thing, too, about Willard Garvey was this. If you had the opportunity to be able to go and work for him, that was the beginning, usually, of the relationship. And as you were saying in the book, Willard was the kind of guy, for a quote of one of, I think it was even Mr. Page, was that Willard would open doors for you or he'd push you through them.
That was true. I mean, if you had an idea, he'd say, go ahead and do it.
Right.
That was by his CFO, Harvey Childers, who is still with us and, accounts his whole life experience to Willard, opening doors for him. And poor Harvey worked a lot of late nights when Willard was overseas. Again, no fax, no email, long-distance phone calls from an office in the middle of the night. I think Harvey's wife probably endured quite a bit with working for Willard, but gosh, the opportunities one had, they still talk about him today in Wichita, Kansas. So I have a lot of people come up to me that said, I worked for him, and, because of him I was able to start this company, do any number of things in building, in television, in law, and many things. He was definitely wanted to see other people succeed.
But the thing about Willard Garvey, though, is you really wanted to have it. You would really want to have it. You needed to want it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Kind of get a little confused. I feel like his ghost is sitting in front of me. Come on, spit it out, son. But the fact is, you really had to want it because, boy, he was a foreboding individual when it came to challenging you. And as they said, right. You either work for Willard Garvey for 2 weeks or for the rest of your life.
I think that's true. I think you had to be a certain kind of personality. We all have people, bosses in our lives who drove us, a great deal, and we, as much as it killed us, we respected them for it because they made us better workers. And I think, the opportunity they gave us was great. I mean, some of the people, that worked for him came to him very young and are wealthy today. And I talked to some of those people in the book. But yeah, it's if you can do it, do it. If you can't, you're going to fail.
I just remember that there was one secretary that started working for him, and she was advised, don't ever let him see you cry.
That's correct.
No matter how much you're about to break down, get out. Go do it somewhere else.
I don't think it would have been fun working for him, to be honest, but I admire those who could.
Absolutely. Now, going back to the world travels, now, because Willard, I don't know why I even thought of Harvey for some reason. But anyway.
Well, it's Harvey Childers and Willard
Harvey
Garvey.
Childers probably
you're mixing up, yeah.
But the thing is that because he was an on-the-go guy, he was a heck of a driver, and that's very loosely used. But that's a lot of how his world sightseeing was, too.
Yes, that's very true. When he took his son, he didn't really have any patience for anything. He wanted you to see it, but he just wanted kind of to show you where it was. And there were many stories that I heard of, one in particular, his son John and him going to see like Paris in 3 hours and going to the Eiffel Tower, through the Louvre, to the Tuileries, all in 45 minutes. I mean, there was no time to stop and smell the roses, but you were going to see it. And his grandson said the same thing, that he took them to the Grand Canyon and he saw it at 60 miles an hour. So,
as they said, I wanted to show you where it was. It's up to you to see it next time.
I mean, there were people in Wichita former Boy Scouts, 50-year-old former Boy Scouts who remembered riding with that man and nearly, being happy they lived to tell about it. So he was a really crazy driver, and I'm glad I never was in a car with him.
But his wife, Jean, certainly had a lot of patience and tolerance. In fact, the children remember vividly Willard, yes. She was very, very patient. I mean, she really was. It was an adventure for her, and she appreciated it, Now, a lot of times when people hear a story like a Willard Garvey and they hear about entrepreneurs that, we see an end result as it is now where they're doing very well. One example, a lot of us are very familiar with Warren Buffett, the one time the richest man on planet Earth. But if you really read his story, which was very well written, The Snowball, you realize that as much wealth as he was able to cultivate for himself, he had lost tremendous wealth along the way. Willard Garvey wasn't different from that.
No, Willard also lost a lot of money. There were a couple of instances in the book, one being, I think it was the Carney brothers, founders of Pizza Hut, came to him, which is based in Wichita, came to him, and I think they wanted $50,000 and they would give him a piece of the company for $50,000 to build a building, maybe a first franchise. And he looked at them and said, "Who eats pizza?"
Oh, boy.
So that was a big loss for him.
Right.
One of the other things that he did, in this World Homes project that I was talking about, he lost millions on that until finally I think his family members said, "We just can't do this anymore." And he was still in business with his brothers and sisters, so they had some say. And then he built the tallest building in Kansas, which, if you're from New York, that's not a big deal, but it's on the Kansas horizon. It's called the Epic Center, and that's why the book plays off the epic life. Mm-hmm. And he built it in a time when oil was booming in Kansas, and it was a speculative building, and he lost money on it. He couldn't rent it out, and the oil market went bust, and he lost money on tenants, and the building went back over to the lenders. But he was still very proud of it because it was a creation of his part. He was going to build that building and another one, and this was the only one that got built, but it's still on the skyline today, and I think he and his family members are still very proud of that he went out on a limb and built this building, and now it's in the middle of Wichita, and it's a very healthy building. He just didn't make money off it. I think he lost a few millions on that. But he said to his son Jim, I'll regret more if I don't do it. Mm-hmm. So he did. It's just admirable.
And what's important to note about that when you share that story about the Epic building is the fact is that he did things because it was the right thing to do, even if it was the right thing from his perspective.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I have to ask, it's so unique when I get an opportunity to talk with someone like you who takes the time to write a biography on someone. What do you think, if any, changes were made in the way you've seen things in writing this person's story?
what changes were made?
Yeah, no, change, if like any change in you and your perspective about the world, if any.
Oh, yeah. Well, I spent an awful lot of time in Wichita, Kansas, and I love it there, and I love the people there, and they were just lovely to me. And I think, so, again, coming from the East Coast, you come to understand a place, and I think that was the big change in me in terms of really not knowing just one person, but understanding this whole community and how this community was built and its history, and talking to people that are no longer a part of its history because they've passed on. Now, that was a great honor to be able to capture a point in time and a period of time for an entire community, and that was very important and poignant for me, and to hear 200 people want to talk, hear about this story because they were a part of it too. That's kind of exciting. That was very exciting for me. So that changed me a lot. And again, just to understand that there's lots of different ways of looking at things, and anti-FDR. I think there was a line in the book one time that I had about FDR, the world mourned when FDR died. Well, that's not exactly true, and I wasn't particularly aware of that, So learning what makes up a community and the people who make up a community, that was really important for me, and it did change me. And I loved Wichita. It's a great place to be.
And I think what's important to note too is that it gives us a very unique snapshot of what the American dream truly is. This day and age, when you hear a lot of the political rhetoric, especially around election time, we want to help you with that American dream, and almost always, to get that dream house, to get that college education. The American dream is about taking an idea as far as you possibly can. Has nothing to do with buying a house. That's just a byproduct of that idea. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I think you're right. I agree, and I appreciate those thoughts. And it was fun to write about it somebody in the middle of the country, somebody in the middle of the country. I mean, you can, again, everybody thinks that things happen, and Willard said he liked living in Wichita because it was the furthest he could get from both coasts.
Yeah, there you go.
That American dream is alive in every community, and this was a snapshot of one, I think.
Very exciting book. I know that everybody will not only be entertained, but start to realize, hey, I can pull my boots up and I can do it myself, especially this day and age. I was just asked by somebody, well, when you take a look at how life was then, it seemed more opportunities were open and available than they are today. And I said, no, that's not true. In fact, I think opportunity today is even greater than it was in many ways then, just because of what we have. And I know that if Willard were standing next to you, he'd probably look at you and say, "You're just being lazy about the whole thing." What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're probably right, and we had a lot of laughs thinking about what Willard would be like in this internet age. He
probably would have loved Steve Jobs.
Oh yeah, he definitely would.
They were certainly alike.
He was an early adapter of technology, and as was Ray Garvey. They called him the human UNIVAC. He was, they all. I think he liked to move things forward, and it was about progress for him and absolutely new opportunities. And so I think he would, if he was sitting here today, he'd probably say, "Why haven't you done this, and this?" So.
Because I remember you were writing about how he visited the Sony Corporation, and boy, did that expand his imagination. Yes,
he saw some machines being built there, and said, geez, you could, tape shows on TV, and maybe we could put newspapers electronically. I mean, this guy was thinking really about how new, he was an entrepreneur through and through. What can I say?
Mm-hmm. Fascinating book. It's been a pleasure to have you here on the program. Do you have a website people can find out more about your work?
Well, you can go to theindependent.org, which is the publisher of the book. They are a public policy and research organization, and they have a nice write-up about me and some of the things I've done regarding this book. I'm sort of a low-tech person, so I don't have a website, but you can also get the book on Amazon.com as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. What a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
You bet. Again, the book is Willard Garvey, An Epic Life, where you can find out and remember and be inspired by what the original American dream is. You can also follow us. Go to Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50 to find out more. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.